Okay, we're ready. We are live. So, this is what I wanted to learn today. We're going to learn the last Mishna of Pirkei Avot of chapter 1. So, chapter 1, Pirkei Avot, we're making our first siyum conclusion. We have been going, that means we have done 18 classes of Pirkei Avot, which I think is a great achievement. And we've hopefully learned them well. So it's not just learning them; we actually know them well, hopefully by now. All right, so let's have a look at that thing. I want to just show you the beginning part, and then you can we'll have a discussion. So look at this for a second. If you look at Mishna Bet, which we learned quite a few months ago, you'll see Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was amongst the last surviving members of grace, and he would say, the world stands on three things: Torah, service of God, and kindness. Okay, those are the three things that the world stands upon. Now, let's jump to the end of the chapter. Whoops. All the comments. Okay, look at the last Mishnah. Rabban Shimon, the son of Gamliel, would say, by three things is the world sustained: law, truth, and peace, right? Al shloshet dvarim ha'olam kayam. On three things the world exists. So the world kayam is, how do we sustain the world kayam? So al adin v'al emes v'al shalom. On justice, on truth, and peace. Shenemar, how do we know? There's a pasuk in Zechariah. It says, emes u'mishpat u'shalom, you shall have peace, justice, and truth. And the other order, shiftu you shall administer at your gates. So it's telling us that all gates, all society require these things. Now, like we like to do, I first want to tell you a little bit about the author of this Mishnah. So it's good that we have it over here. If you remember we had Rabban Gamliel. Now Rabban Gamliel was the descendant or the son of Hillel, if you recall. Sorry, my computer is. So we had Hillel and Shammai, all those Hillel. Then we had Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel was the first Nasi after the Zugot, after the pairs. Rabban Gamliel has a son named Shimon. Shimon, who's known as Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, then we skip a generation, and when we go to Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, so there's two opinions of this, right? This man's name, the previous Mishnah, he was definitely the son of Gamliel, right? Because he said Shimon beno shel Gamliel. But over here it's called Shimon because of his great humility and several other reasons. Or maybe he said this before he became the Nasi. Could have been other reasons why, different opinions of why he's called him Shimon. And then over here he's called Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Over here he's called Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, so there's two opinions about this. The Meiri says that these two people are the same person. Now we know that there was numerous Gamliels and there's numerous Shimons. Shimon had a son. This Shimon, we know, had a son named Gamliel, who was Rabban Gamliel. So this Shimon could be either the same person or it could be the grandson. The Meiri says it's the same person. Most of the other commentators say, no, it's the grandson. It's the grandson of this Shimon. We skip a generation. We don't have a quote from his son, Rabban Gamliel. But we skip to the next one, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay? So that's the Meiri is almost what we call a Dat Yachid. He's the only one that seems to imply that this was the same author of the two Mishnot. So we'll go on based on the fact that it is a different person and it is really the grandson. Now, if it's the grandson, then who is it? Who is he? Let's find out about him. We spoke last week about Shimon ben Gamliel. This week we'll talk about Rabban Shimon Gamliel. He is this person, the grandson of the original Shimon ben Gamliel, is actually the father of the author of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Okay? Now, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel lived in the era of the post-temple era. So he was alive in the time of the, I think he was alive during or just after destruction. And he lives in the era of Bar Kokhba, the Bar Kokhba revolt. And he's the leader of the Jewish people, is the official Nasi during the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Now we know the Bar Kokhba revolt, there was many of the great rabbis of that generation were all Rabbi Akiva, who lived 120 years, so he spread over from the end of the destruction, from the destruction through past the Bar Kokhba revolt for some time. And Rabbi Akiva is also still alive in the time of Shimon Gamliel. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is the official Nasi of the Jewish people. Now, the way he recognized the Nasi is because going back to Hillel was appointed Nasi. Rabbi Gamliel, his son, is appointed then Nasi, and it goes from child to son unless the son wasn't able to do it. But it continued to generally, the Nasi, the leader, the position of Nasi continued from Hillel through his children. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is the thing. It's eventually the smicha, we're going to find out over here, more or less in this period, which is the period of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, his son. After the Bar Kokhba revolt, what ends up happening is the Romans outlaw the giving of smicha. And I believe that there's no official Nasi as well, even though there were Nasim, Napim, we will consider like the highest. I don't think there was actual official Nasis after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the author of the Mishna, who is the son of this gentleman. So after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Romans massacred hundreds of thousands of Jews because it was the strongest revolt ever put against them. And they felt that the ones that were responsible for this were the rabbis that had encouraged the revolt. Funnily enough, the revolt against the Romans in the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, the rabbis did not encourage. They were against that revolt. In the time of Bar Kokhba, many rabbis were not against the revolt. And the reason, well, there's different reasons. I don't want to get into it. It's not really the point of our discussion. But they during the time of the destruction, they believed that was what was supposed to happen. And Bar Kokhba had the ability to actually overthrow the Roman government from a natural perspective. But his sins did not allow him to do that. And we know this when we one day talk about Bar Kokhba. But putting that aside, Shimon ben Gamliel has to escape. He actually has to escape from the Romans because having been, connected to Bar Kokhba, and they're hunting down the rabbis and the leaders at the time. So Shimon ben Gamliel escapes, and then afterwards he comes back out. We also know about, I think, first of all, at the end of one of the tractates, I think it's Tractate Sota, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that there was three most humble people that lived, very humble people that lived in the previous generations. One of them, he says, was Yonasan, the son of Shaul, because he was willing to abdicate the throne for King David and be second in command to King David. The other one was maybe Hillel. I'm trying to remember. And the third one, he said was his father, Shimon ben Gamliel. So he considered his father to be one of the most humble people ever. What's interesting, though, is that even though he was so humble, he felt very strongly that the position of the Nasi has to be like a very strong and solidified position, which was basically his position. And he didn't like much, I don't know what the right wording is, but attacking or trying to, make a coup against the Nasi. So while he was himself extremely humble, but the position of the Nasi, which was his own position, he was very strong upon. Just one or two more things about him. He was famous for several things. First of all, he was famous for saying that after destruction of the temple, we should ban things like meat and other delicacies. However, the principle is that when the Jewish people would not be able to handle the decree, we can't make that decree. And being that we can't handle the decree, therefore for that reason, the Jewish people wouldn't handle it, so we can't make that decree. And that's of course a famous principle in Judaism, that a decree that won't be withstood by the Jewish people is void. So if you know a decree is not going to be accepted in the first place, you don't make it. And that's what he was saying, which is interesting for those that there are people that till today will not listen to live music, because there was a decree made, at least for a certain amount of time, not to have live music in the post-temple era. Okay, so that's a little bit about him. Oh, one great statement. He's got lots of sayings. First of all, he's mentioned about 100 times in the Mishna. And Rabbi Yochanan says about Shimon ben Gamliel that every time that he's quoted in the Mishna, the halacha follows him except for 3 times. So he was held in very high regard. And one quick statement to be saying, he says that the pious do not require memorials and monuments for them, because their words and their teachings are their monuments. Okay, so it's a very powerful statement. He has lots of other interesting statements about him. All right, let's look inside and see what he actually says more in depth. So he talks about, I showed you to start off with the difference between what he said over here and what he said by the other Shimon. The other Shimon was Shimon HaTzadik, who lived even before the era of the Hanukkah story. He lives centuries ago, right at the beginning. He was the last member of the Men of the Great Assembly, and he says that the world stands on 3 pillars. In other words, he says Torah, Avot, and Gemilas Chasadim. That means that there's something that there's 2 different opinions of how it's understood, the difference between what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying and what Shimon HaTzadik is saying. The one is saying that the basic understanding is that Shimon HaTzadik was saying that the world was created and sustained by these 3 things. Al Torah, Val Avot, Val Gemilas Chasadim. And if you don't have those 3 things, you won't have a world. The other approach is to say, no, the world was created and is sustained by those. But going forward, in order to have a sustainable society, we require these 3 things. In other words, the simple understanding would be, if you want world to exist, full stop, to have a world with an existence, you require those 3 things. Those are the energy blocks, the power machine, the energy source of the world. Torah, Avot, and Gemilas Chasadim. Then you have, in other words, if you have no Torah, the world would cease to exist. If you have no Avodah, no service, divine service, the world would cease to exist. If you have no kindness, the world will cease to exist. And then you have what virtues actually create a healthy society. Careful. What do you mean? Shambay walked in. Just close the door. Go out, close the door. Okay, my apologies. So this is the difference that he says, that we see the difference, okay? One is what we need for society, virtues to have a normal society, and the other one is for the actual existence of the world. So let's look at focusing in on these 3 virtues that the world requires to be sustained. He first says al-hadin.
Sorry, Rabbi, I do need to ask. It mentions there like ha'olam. The translation of that in the English, it says the world, but what does it actually mean? Like planet Earth or the universe, or?
So the world is sustained. Well, it's talking. So that's why I said, if we go back over here, it says, the world stands upon them. Okay. In other words, this is the very existence of the world. So in other words, if the world didn't have these three things, these are what's holding up the world. It's a spiritual, divine force, energy, mobilization of the world. This is the electricity of the world. Without that, the world dies.
Sorry, I'll reword my question. The word world, nowadays, when we say world, we often mean planet Earth. That's in common use.
Okay, so I don't know if it's talking about planet Earth. It's talking over here in this one. It's definitely talking about civilization within planet Earth.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so it's talking about civilization as society, as human beings, how civilization, the world, as a general whole, what are the most important ingredients?
Yep, you can understand why I raise that, because there's plenty of people who feel that planet Earth can do just fine without humans.
Right. So the answer to that would be look in Halacha Bet and Mishna Bet, and Mishna Bet would say that's not possible. The Mishna Bet says the world was created actually for these three pillars, Torah, Avot, and Gemilas Chasadim. If we don't have those three things, God created the world. So on a natural perspective, it may be possible, but then you, in other words, if you looked at the world as the world has no purpose and the world is just to be a beautiful place, right? So why did God create the world? Well, he wanted some animals to enjoy the world and have a good time. Beautiful. But from a Jewish perspective, God did have a reason. These are his three reasons. Torah, Avot, and Gemilas Chasadim. Take away these three things, there's no world left, right? So the world cannot exist without them. Now we're saying, okay, in order to have the world exist, there is a world, Earth, you have these three things, but now you have to have society, civilization. What do you need? You need to have justice, you have to have truth, and you have to have shalom. So what do these three things mean? Most of it is relatively simple. There's two ways that you can look at it. There's within the world of the world of the court world, so to speak, the world of legal world, the world of justice within itself, the judicial world, and then there's the world as a whole. So there's two ways of how we're looking at it. The one thing is justice, that you have to have people and judges being honest and finding justice, and then everyone gets convicted. You have to be, number two, the innocent go free or acquitted, and the guilty are punished. That's justice. MS is truth. You have to have truth. You have to have people actually abiding by the truth and teaching the truth. So who has to be truthful? If you're talking about on a judicial perspective, you're saying that the witnesses have to be truthful, right? And the litigants have to be truthful. If you're talking about as a whole, if we as a civilization do not recognize the concept of truth, the world would die. In other words, we would fight each other and falsehoods ran, and we're seeing that. And then the last thing, shalom. There's shalom between, on a macro level, the world only exists because countries and people of difference are able to come together and make peace with each other. And on the legal sense, in the judicial sense, shalom also means peace within a court case, the ability to compromise. Noach, do you have to go to your shir? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shkach for joining.
Thank you, so. Bye, Joe. Bye, Rabbi.
Bye. Okay, so Joe, let's look at this thing for another moment.
Sure.
There's another way there's another interesting discussion that I wanted to point out over here is.
And by the way, you can tell I'm going with the interpretation of human civilization here. Ha'olam is human civilization.
Yeah, 100%. So a human civilization, he says, we need these three things. We really need to have the ability to have justice within the world, convict and whatever it is. But that could mean, that the people that have been done wrong get punished. There's a requirement for it. There's an interesting story, or not story, but it's a quote in the Mishnah that says, in the Talmud, it's actually a Mishnah that says that a Beth Din that kills 1 in 70 years does a capital punishment, is a murderous Beth Din, right? It's a famous quote. Rabbi Akiva says that if I was the Sanhedrin, of course, after the Sanhedrin ended, the capital punishment ceased from the Beth Din. But he says and the Sanhedrin ended even before the time of Rabbi Akiva. If I was part of the Sanhedrin, no one would ever die. Who says that? Both him and Rabbi Tarfon, his friend. To which one of the other rabbis, I think it may have been Rabbi Yochanan, said, he says, well, I'm glad that you're being so virtuous, but what you're actually doing is you're adding evil and murder in the world. Because those offenses that the Torah puts in are there to protect people. And by removing them and being extra strict about who you kill, it actually makes people kill more. But it's there as a deterrent for people.
Yep.
Okay. And okay, so let's talk about one or two other things. We have over here sometimes things that can be contradictory. Sometimes justice. So justice seemingly would be the same thing as truth. In order to get justice, the only way you can get justice is if you have truth, right? If you agree on a truth, that's how you get justice. Of course, if there's lies, there's no truth. There's an interesting thing about the word truth and lies. If you look at the word truth, the letters for the word truth, each of them stand on flat surface or two levels. So they have a stable ground. If you look at the word sheker, you'll see that each stand on 1 foot. So the shin stands on a little point. I'm just looking for a kuf. A kuf also stands on a single point. It's floppy. And,
Yep.
the letter resh also stands on a single leg.
Mm-hmm.
While the letter, the words aleph, mem, taf are always starting. And of course, the word ms, there's so much we could talk about the word ms, we just don't have the time for it. But ms implies beginning of the alphabet, taf is the end, and mem is the middle, to tell us that truth is something that doesn't change. Truth is unchangeable. But the question is, what happens if in order to get peace, you need to lie? What is more important, truth or lying? So can you lie for truth? It's a discussion in and of itself, and I've given actually like an hour-long shir on this, but I just want to touch on some of these points. So it's interesting that when you look at Aaron and Moshe, Aaron was called the man of peace, and Moshe is called Moshe Emes, the man of truth. And apparently during their lifetimes, Moshe thought, you could never lie. He was a man that could never say anything other, even for the sake of peace. But that's who he was. He had to be 100% truthful because that was his role. Aaron was all about peace, and he was willing to stretch the truth, not fully lie, but stretch the truth to get to peace. And we find that also with Yosef and his brothers, after their father passes away, they lie, saying that their father said this and this, and in order that there should be peace and that they shouldn't starve, etc. And it's not, and it's acceptable as the right thing, as though the brothers did the right thing. However, there's an interesting story of Rav's wife, the famous Tana Amoira. He was considered like right in between the eras of the Tanaim and the Amoraim, and he says the Talmud relates how his wife drove him mad. Whenever he would ask for one thing, his wife would do the opposite, exactly the opposite. So his son couldn't stand it. So his son decides he's going to ask whatever his father wants. He tells his father, you ask through me. And whatever he wanted, he said, Dad wants to go. If Dad wanted, I don't know, to go to sleep, he'd say, Dad wants to stay awake. So he would always say the opposite. And then he got exactly what he wanted. So Rav saw what his son was doing, and he said, well, I appreciate you doing this, but I want you to stop. Why do I want you to stop? Not because it's not the right thing to do when somebody's purposely going against you, because we don't want to get used to lying. I don't want you to get used to the concept of lying. So therefore, I'd rather not get what I want in order that you should not get used to the concept of lying. Okay. But ultimately, it all falls out that the conclusion is that if you can do it as a one-off thing for peace, then peace overrides truth. There's actually there's a statement in the Torah where we see that Moshe seems to be agreeing with Aaron that ultimately peace should prevail when possible. And that leads back, all these three things are connected. If you have peace, you'll have justice and you'll have truth. So peace within the Leviticus is the concept in the micro is the concept of a compromise. If you're not able to compromise, you'll struggle to get to peace. And we're told that a Beth Din that's able to make a compromise is able to ultimately reach greater peace. If they're able to compromise without having to force, of course, if one person is actually stealing from the other, that's problematic. I'll just conclude with one last story.
Sure, it's a fascinating thing because in popular culture out there, there's the concept for a long time of the white lie, which you may have heard that expression.
Yeah.
So, and now I can see the origins, where it comes from, that most lies are considered black, but there's a white lie, which is justified.
At times, yes.
At times.
That's right, 100%. There's an interesting story getting back to the last point, which is the concept of the din, the justice, and the compromise. There's a fascinating story. It's brought down in a book, I think it was the Mincha something. And he brings the story of Alexander the Great, that when Alexander conquered India, he came across, he was judging a case. He was acting as the judge. And two Indian litigants come to him. And the one person says, I bought the field from this gentleman, and when I was plowing our field, I dug up a treasure. But I never paid for the treasure. The treasure does not belong to me. It belongs to the person that sold me the field. And the seller said, no, the treasure does not belong to me either. I sold him the field and everything inside of it. So Alexandra apparently turned to the two litigants and asked them if they had children, to which they both said, yes, they do. He says, why don't you get your children to marry each other, and then you'll have the issue taken care of. Your children can both share the treasure. And that story was brought as an example of people that should always try to find a way to make a good compromise. And compromise brings, in such a case, those are the type of cases that we want. The cases where each one wants to give the other person the gift. All right. We'll stop there. I've actually got something else on now. But I appreciate you joining. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was fascinating and quite contemporary.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, 100%. Definitely could be very contemporary. Always useful. Okay, I'll speak to you. Cheers, Joe.
Thank
you. Bye.